Hello and welcome to my tiny tarot practice. My name is Amelia Ruby, and this podcast documents my tiny tarot practice card by card. Today's card is the Six of Pentacles. In this card in the Rider-Waite-Smith-Coleman edition of the tarot, we see what appears to be a wealthy person based on their colorful garments, their headdress and wrap and boots, holding scales and passing out coins to two figures who are kneeling below them, looking up at them, hands open. And in this card, with this card, one of the first images that comes to mind is that of charity, of giving to those who are perhaps less fortunate, and of the hierarchy that is involved in such an act. We could also choose to see it as generosity. I think generosity is a way of removing hierarchy from charity, but I chose the word charity carefully because I do think that this card suggests a hierarchy. And in my readings to see how some of my favorite tarot interpreters looked at this card, it was really interesting to see how they engaged with this hierarchy. So for instance, Jessica Dorr in her book Tarot for Change really sees this as an imbalanced hierarchy, as what happens when one is giving to the other and there's not that mutual reciprocal exchange, whether it be of material goods or coins, as in a very literal interpretation of the pentacles, or perhaps more energetic resources and the ways that we share our energy and emotions with others. In contrast, in Rachel Pollack's 78 Degrees of Wisdom, the interpretation of the card there is really more about giving what you are able to give, and even more so giving what someone else is able to receive. And not in the way where you project onto them what they need and then just decide that's what it is, but in a much more, according to her, deeply intuitive, integrated, highest selves sense. And as she unpacks this card, she talks even more about how perhaps it's less about people giving things to each other and more about the way that life gives us what we need when we follow those breadcrumbs of what we feel or know to be true. And so she talks about how many people who study the tarot start to discover that life is giving them just what they need next, or that things are opening up, possibilities are emerging, synchronicity is arising. And that comes, or can come, from this Six of Pentacles sense of balance. The person who is doing the giving is holding scales. And so often, those scales are a figure of justice or a symbol of justice. And when I think back to the first thing that I shared of, charity and generosity, the question of hierarchy, often when we allow hierarchy in our lives, it's through the lens of justice. It's mitigated by justice. Unjust hierarchies are things to rebel against, critique, refuse, resist. But there are moments where we choose hierarchy, where we choose a leader to be in power, where we choose to submit to the divine and to surrender. And justice can also be an act of surrender. That feels hard to unpack or acknowledge or sit with in this political climate, in a world imbued with power over. But it's something that I think the Six of Pentacles invites us to sit with if we feel called. I certainly think there are situations where pulling this card might be a direct marker that you're experiencing an imbalanced hierarchy, or you are in the position of power. I mean, it's ambiguous here. If you pull the card, are you in the position of power, or are you in the position of the one on their knees? That's certainly a question to ask. Were this card to come up in a reading, or it's a question I would ask if I got this card in a reading. But if that didn't bring up an obvious situation to me, I might take it a step deeper into thinking about where I allow hierarchy in my life, where I invite hierarchy in my life, and where I see justice emerging. Thank you so much for tuning into my tiny tarot practice. As always, I'm your host, Amelia Ruby. If you'd like to explore any of the books that I've referenced here, you can find them at the link in the show notes. I have a bookshop page where I curate my favorite tarot decks and books, even some fun special gifts like puzzles and journals. If you make a purchase through that page, I will receive a small affiliate payout that lets me keep this podcast going. So check it out at the link in the show notes, and we'll be back soon with another card. I hope that between now and then, you give what you're able to give and receive what you need to receive.